Okay, so for the first assignment, it was the historical fiction discussion. For the first article, writing backward modern models in historical fiction. So the first question is, do you think it is okay to have modern models, particularly in women's roles in historical fiction, or not? And then why or why not?
I feel like there should be, because there isn't that many women out there that have a voice in literacy. And even if it is historical fiction, it's always good to see, or like, just get into that imagination and into a different world of maybe what they have been thinking and what they have been going through.
So I said that similar, like it's okay to have modern models because it's even though it's like historical, it's still a fiction piece. So not everything has to be historically accurate. Um, I don't see a problem with it as long as like the setting of the story is like in the past and some of the history is accurate. I think that having like modern models and ideologies is okay.
Yeah, just to add to what I said, I think that no matter the genre, like when there's a role model for women, like it's important because the majority of time there's like only like a male role, like yeah, male characters or main characters on the genre. So even if it's history, fiction history, I think it's important for like the children, especially the girls, to feel like just connected or represented.
I
Okay.
also, oh, sorry.
Oh, go
I
ahead.
also, it also can be a very gray line because I'm just thinking about this right now because we don't want to misrepresent a woman and just make her seem like the typical um, woman that needs help and in need, because then that is just going to keep going with this typical stereotype and keep feeding the audience that women are very weak and vulnerable. So that, I feel like that is the very gray side and like the black side of when we're talking about historical fiction and women in the books.
There was also like an argument in the article saying like women authors are portraying women in this historical fiction like as being rebellious and stuff, but not getting like consequences. Whereas if this was really like in the past, that more likely than not they would be getting harsh punishment and stuff for rebelling, not being like successful and like getting like good things for rebelling. So I don't know. Yeah, it is like a very like gray line if you want to portray like what would have really happened, or if you want to give like a role model to the kids. It's hard.
What's the
Question.
second question?
So it was, do you think historical fiction should focus more on the everyday experience or the experience of more unusual people?
What does he mean by like everyday experience? Just
Like the daily life of someone in the past, or if we should focus on like big people like presidents or things like that.
I feel it's always good to hear from someone that isn't in the big picture, because if we are talking about a king, we would like to hear what's going on. Like for example, in the French Revolution, um, where the queen was like, "Let them eat cake," and all we see is from her perspective. But if we really like Les Miserables, we see from their perspective in a way, and the things that they had to go through. So
I was thinking it would be good for a mix because yeah, like kings and presidents and all them are important because they're like big figures, but you also want to see history from like the everyday individual's life because history is all about interpretation. Like there's always two sides to a story. So I think it's good to not see like more of one or the other, but like a mix so that we see kind of both interpretation.
no, yes, I do agree with that. Like that, there can also be like it's not just from one side; it can be from both sides.
Mhm.
Yeah, but yeah, it could be like both sides, but like there needs to be like add more like the everyday situation because pretty much all the history of the fiction history is just like something like a big event or important event. So I think that yeah, it should be like included more like everyday situations for history.
I also noticed that it in the article it mentions more minorities are included in the experiences of ordinary people as opposed to movers and shakers. So like the big people and like the small voices are also are being more included into like libraries and books and whatnot.
Huh.
So
Goes to how you. Um, so moving on to the second article, which was the poll. The first question was agree that fiction can and should outweigh historical when it comes to historical fiction.
um, it's funny because when I was reading through it at the end, it says at the end of all of this, there are stories, and they are fictional stories. So not every story is going to be accurate.
That's kind of what I was like playing with. Like, it's okay if it does, the fiction does outweigh the history because it's historical fiction. Like, it's not claiming to be 100% like nonfiction. It's not claiming to be historically accurate. It is historical fiction. And like, there's always, like I said earlier, there's always two viewpoints to a story. So maybe someone does think it's historically accurate and someone doesn't. And you don't like, there's no way to find out if it is or not because you weren't there, if that makes sense. So it's not claiming exactly to be 100% accurate. So I think it's okay if the fiction does outweigh the historical as long as it's set in like a historical time period and you do see elements of that time period.
No, yes, and also, I mean, and it's really hard to also figure out where is the date and time of a specific because they did talk about Thanksgiving and
Oh yeah, the Canadian.
yeah, and so the Canadian versus the US and how the Canadian are going to like be like, no, this is not the correct date from Thanksgiving. And the US are like, oh, we don't care. Like it's fine. Like we'll keep on going. One question, what does she mean about that all history is fiction? How much of history is fiction? I'd have to say to pretty much all of it.
It's because what the dictionary defines.
I think what's that?
Oh, it's discussing what the dictionary defines to be like fact or whatever. And so, according to what the dictionary defined it as, all of history would be like fiction.
Fiction.
Wow, but it's like really, I never heard it been spoken like that before. That all history
Yes,
is fiction.
According to the Oxford Dictionary, a fact is a thing that is undisputably the case. So she's saying history is, we rely on like people telling us what happened in history. So technically history is not undisputably the case. Someone could always put a case, like someone could always dispute that didn't happen. If you're going by that definition of fact, then history is,
every history is fiction.
Yeah.
And so that's the scary part because if we're reading historical fiction and a student is reading this and they're going to think, no, this is real, this is what really happened.
It happens a lot. Like, there's a lot of teachers teach, and like, it didn't really happen.
So, what's the next question?
Says, should accuracy in historical fiction be more important than storytelling? So I said accuracy about the events should be more important than storytelling, but like the author, so like in the article when she mentions if there was a pocket in the style of apron that Norwegian immigrants wore, like that's a minor detail. Like it's not a main event that happened. That doesn't have to be accurate, whether it was a pocket or not. Like it doesn't really change the historical time or anything like that. Now, if it's like a major event and you're saying like she, a preacher read it off the steps of a courthouse, or he said it on the radio. Like, if you're saying he said it on the radio and radio didn't exist at the time, I think that's like a bit ridiculous. That you should be accurate then, but whether an apron had a pocket or not play such a big role as if you're saying radio when there wasn't radio.
No, I do agree with that. But it's also very important, like little details, like you mentioned, like the radio, and it's like you're putting the radio in the 18th century. And you're like, wait a minute, there was not even like that does not make any sense. And then one thing that she also talked about in portraying with all of this was that she wasn't a big, huge when it comes to religion and searching information about that. And I thought that was very interesting how she was talking about all these other figures. And so when we're saying that if what was the question? I can't find it.
Should accuracy be more important than storytelling?
So yeah, so if we're also talking about religion, because back in the day religion was a huge thing, and religion was also a form of government. And so if that is not being represented correctly through many religious points of view, then they can totally call the author out.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I agree with that as well.
And then the last question for this assignment was, at what point does a text of nonfiction rather than historical fiction?
At what point does a text become a piece of nonfiction rather than... I feel like when you add, like, you take away the dates and you add like things that really didn't exist, and or like, going back to the future, or talking about a whole new different world, I feel like that's when it becomes nonfiction.
So I agree. I definitely agree with that part of it, but I kind of said I did it like a percentage. So I think if the historical fiction piece is like 75% of it is not accurate, then you would make it nonfiction. Because at that point, I mean, what part of history are you really telling?
And what events are really true, and if what really happened in those events. So you can totally go into different kinds of realms in different ways.
Yeah, and that just kind of like confuse the children.
Exactly. And then they start believing fake.
So then we did the second assignment was the children's authors. And it says, what makes these authors so passionate about historical fiction? So with the first one, what was her name? Jewel Parker Rhodes. When I was watching that video, like, her tone of voice, you can tell she's just so passionate about it. Like, she wants you to know what really happened, and she wants people to like study the past and write about it in their own stories as well. You can tell she's just so like her tone of voice was like, oh, I want to like try and write a story.
No, and I feel like that's very important. Like the way that she just says it, it's like it just, and I'm not a big person, and people that are not big in reading or any kind of subject, and when someone is just talking about it so passionately, you really get motivated. We have 1 more minute.
Oh, okay. And then so there was another one. What ignites this passion of authors to write historical fiction?
Well, what ignites us to be educators?
Our passion for working with children.
Exactly.
So, like I said, Jules' passion for wanting to spread the word of the past about like a topic she's so passionate about, which would happen to be like slaves and plantations and whatnot.
Yeah, especially.
And then the last
when it
question,
comes to when it comes to people just that haven't been really represented. So
yeah,
5 seconds.
Oh.